is a CNN special report, White House in crisis. Tonight, explosive high-level testimony about the Trump camp's contacts with Russia as the president appears ready to hire a personal lawyer in this rapidly expanding investigation. I'm Jim Sciutto.
And I'm Pamela Brown. We are following all the breaking news in the Russia probe. And the central questions tonight, was there collusion or obstruction of justice? Former CIA Director John Brennan revealing for the first time that he was concerned about contacts between Russian officials and the Trump campaign last year. And he told lawmakers today that he feared the Russians have often tried to lure people down a, quote, treasonous path to act on Moscow's behalf, either willingly or without even knowing it. Now, the White House is putting its own spin on this hearing, claiming it shows there is no evidence of collusion, even though Brennan pointedly refused to say that. Now, as this investigation intensifies, CNN has confirmed that Mr. Trump is expected to take a significant new step and hire a personal lawyer, turning to a powerful attorney that he's relied on before by the name of Mark Kasowitz. Also tonight, the Senate Intelligence Committee is keeping alive the threat that it will hold fired National Security Advisor Michael Flynn in contempt of Congress for defying a subpoena. But first, the panel says it's issuing new subpoenas for Flynn's businesses because businesses can't invoke Fifth Amendment rights, as Flynn is promising to do. So, Jim, potentially damaging testimony today from the former CIA director.
Directly contradicting, really, the story we've been hearing from the White House from some months now. The former CIA director making clear today that some of the most troubling aspects of Russian interference in the U.S. election remain very much under investigation. First, Brennan confirmed repeated contacts between Trump advisors and Russians during the campaign.
I encountered and am aware of information and intelligence that revealed contacts and interactions between Russian officials and U.S. persons involved in the Trump campaign that I was concerned about because of known Russian efforts to suborn such individuals, and it raised questions in my mind, again, whether or not the Russians were able to gain the cooperation of those individuals.
Now, the White House seized on his comments as somehow confirming that the FBI has found no proof of such cooperation, saying, quote, despite a year of investigation, there is still no evidence of any Russia-Trump campaign collusion, end quote. But in fact, that is not what Brennan said. In fact, he said the question of collusion remains, quote, unresolved.
And I was worried by a number of the contacts that the Russians had with U.S. persons. And so therefore, by the time I left office on January 20th, I had unresolved questions in my mind as to whether or not the Russians had been successful in getting U.S. persons involved in the campaign or not to work on their behalf, again, either in a witting or unwitting fashion.
We're joined now by CNN's team of reporters. We've been following this story really in depth for a number of weeks now. Gloria, you look at these moments here. First of all, the White House denied and even called out its CIA director and others to challenge that there were repeated contacts of this when we in the New York Times reported it some months ago.
Right.
But on this question of collusion again today, as the president repeated saying, they've said there's no evidence of collusion. That's not what the CIA director said.
No, it's not what he said. He said that there was a 5-alarm fire going on, and he didn't know how to put it out. I mean, we learned today that the CIA director alerted the FBI. Not only did he alert the FBI, but he went to his counterpart in Moscow and said, you guys better cut this out. Not only did he do that, but he held a classified briefing with senior leadership in the Congress. And then after that, he went to the President of the United States, Barack Obama, and said, this is something we have to be concerned about. So when we've been reporting all along about these conversations, whether it was with Russians or Russia to Russia, as we reported last week, we now are getting a fuller picture of just how concerned the Obama White House was about this before the Trump team took over.
And to be clear, they were concerned, and intelligence officials were concerned, Evan, not just about that Russia was interfering in the election, but that they were picking up conversations between Trump advisors and Russians during the election.
Right. His big concern at this point, as he described it, and this is really important testimony today because it's the first time we've heard from one of these officials publicly saying exactly what was going on behind the scenes, including the fact that the CIA, the FBI, and the NSA basically got together a task force to take a look at this. And he described how his big concern was that maybe someone was already turned inside the Trump campaign and was doing the work of Russian intelligence. That's incredible words to come.
It's a remarkable question to raise.
It's the strongest language we've heard yet from an official, a former official in this case. And, as you'll recall, we reported some time ago that there was concern among law enforcement and intelligence that Russians were trying to use Carter Page, who was considered by some a Trump advisor, Trump campaign advisor, trying to have him infiltrate the campaign. And so as they're watching these communications play out, as you point out, the concern necessarily isn't from the Trump side, it's the Russians. What are they trying to do to these people to get in the campaign and basically be spies?
Well, and that's when he said it was wittingly or unwittingly.
Right.
So, he was sort of making the point, and I don't know whether he had Carter Page in mind, but whether you know it, buddy, they were trying to turn you. You may not have been aware of it.
Exactly.
Dan, infiltration of a U.S. presidential campaign. Again, they haven't established this as being successful. He raised that here today, but he also has not eliminated that.
Hasn't eliminated it, but the way that he told this story, which was really out of a Jim Clancy novel, except that it was real, was remarkable, and it was riveting to hear his testimony. And I just want to underscore that something that you all have noted, but I think it bears repeating, that what this man said, who was the director of the CIA, real time, underscored and confirmed what everybody at this table has been reporting, and then some, about all of the concerns inside the intelligence community, inside the law enforcement community, about what Russia was trying to do vis-a-vis the Trump campaign. And I think to your point, Jim, what he did not say was they weren't successful. What he did not say was they didn't make it. He said, we don't know yet. And it is still very much an open question.
And that's a consistent point from whether it's Brennan today, Clapper earlier. Often their comments are misinterpreted or misconstrued, frankly.
The White House does that intentionally. The president says that. Well, when James Clapper says he's seen no evidence, that means that there is no collusion. But in fact, when James Clapper testified himself before the congressional committees, he said that he didn't know because the FBI was investigating this issue, and he actually had a firewall of sorts between himself as a director of national intelligence and the FBI. Similarly here, even though John Brennan says he has not seen any evidence, does not mean that he does not mean that there is no evidence. It just means that he had concerns and he passed this along to the FBI.
One quick point I want to make here, and just to step back at this, we've all been facing the criticism from the Trump administration, the White House, and some of his supporters that we won't drop this story. And the reason for this is that all throughout the campaign and even through the transition, we heard from them repeatedly that there were no such contacts, there was none of these communications. We're hearing this now straight from the mouth of the former CIA director that there were. And now he's saying it publicly. And so this is why when they say these things, people don't believe them anymore. And that's why we have to wait and see how these investigations.
And I just want to say for the record, I know it's Tom Clancy, not Jim Clancy. He was our colleague. Everybody out there on Twitter.
I'm sure the
yes,
exactly.
There was another word today that many of us and others took note of. Brennan going one step further in his testimony, bringing up a word no other senior U.S. official involved in this investigation has uttered so far. Have a listen.
Frequently, individuals who go along that treasonous path do not even realize they're along that path until it gets to be a bit too late.
Again, certainly, I should be clear here, not confirming treasonous activity took place, but raising a question, a very serious one of many unresolved questions here. And I asked people close to Brennan today, did he intentionally raise that question? And yes, he did.
Of course. That's a strong
word
right
there. With the qualifier, this unwitting versus, the kind of useful idiot scenario where you go down a path that perhaps you didn't intend to go down.
Exactly.
But that's a remarkable word to hear today.
People watching at home may be like, well, how do you not know that you're going down a treasonous path? How do you not know? And the way it's been explained to me is that the Russians, it's a long game for them. It happens over years where they just it's a slow roll, and they just try to befriend you and get you on their side, do a favor. And so you can, before you know it, you're doing favors for them, but not realizing sort of what the situation is.
And keep in mind, this is actually a really important point in the FBI investigation, because one of the things the FBI has been struggling with in this investigation is trying to discern what are business contacts. A lot of these people were doing business. At the same time, they're trying to pretend that they had some kind of juice inside the Trump campaign. So they were mixing business and politics. And the Russians were only too glad to do this because they like to do this as well. And so, a lot of the people who perhaps some of these people were dealing with are business people, but then when they go back to Moscow or back to Russia, they are reporting back to the FSB.
Put this on top of Sally Yates's testimony, where there's another person who ran to the White House with her hair on fire. And she talked about General Flynn potentially being subject to blackmail. And you talk about how you turn somebody. Well, if you have enough communication, if you are paid substantially by a government or for a speech, or there is a way to cultivate. And then at some point, which was Sally Yates's point, you have to start worrying that if this person is in the government, they can be subject.
And you guys are already, we had Friday about the bragging among Russian officials of their ability to cultivate.
Right.
Yates's issue was specific to perjury. Had he lied about his communications? The other question of influence is money. Right? And investment, which is an issue that has been raised about the president himself, never substantiated, but is one of the reasons why investigators, at least on the Democratic side, have wanted to have records, financial records, so they could establish if there's any undue influence.
It's always follow the money. I mean, that's just the bottom line in any investigation. But I think you guys have all laid out the why and the how. But I just want to go back to the term, treasonous. I mean, that was a showstopper today when he said that word. And the fact that you were told that that was not unintentional, which, given what we know about Brennan, is probably not surprising. He uses his words carefully. It's pretty remarkable, especially given the fact that one of the questions, as we hear more and more about this, is, okay, things were maybe untoward, unethical, didn't really feel right. But was anything illegal? Treason is illegal.
And look, it's going to be interesting to see when James Comey does testify before the Senate Intelligence Committee. One of the senators, of course, is going to ask him, do you agree with John Brennan's sworn testimony that there could have been a treasonous act here? And James Comey is a private citizen now. We'll see what he says.